Imagine a world where people can be cloned, but this is done in a clandestine way, and the demand was growing a lot, since a mischievous crowd hired these criminal companies to clone celebrities and do, well, you know what? I'm sure you would clone an e-girl, our MC said, who is a tough cop fighting this crime. He arrests these people and sends the clones to a refuge city. Our MC was newly married, and during a business trip his wife disappeared in a plane crash. He had spent his whole life fighting the illegal cloning of human beings, but now this criminal company had developed a technology that allowed them to perfectly clone a person's personality and memories. Would he commit a crime and clone his own wife? This story is full of twists, everyone, and even a little fan service. If you want me to keep bringing these unique stories, leave a like and a comment. Without further delay, let's get into the video. The story begins in an underground clandestine factory. That shameless guy was smelling a foot while his coworker said he had smelled enough. In that factory there were several women ready to be delivered to clients. They were perfect clones, made of flesh and bone. On the leg of one of them there was even a sticker with the address where she would be delivered. In a neighborhood of the city, a police operation was taking place. Our protagonist named Feng was organizing the mission. He ran to storm the building and the criminals started shouting. Within moments they were subdued. The place was a complete mess and many of them ended up losing their lives. These criminals cloned people and that's why they were arrested. And our tough hero looked at the place where the clones were produced. It was a large underground factory with several tanks. Inside those tanks, people were, in quotation marks, cultivated, so to speak, and it was done in an accelerated way to meet the high demand for orders. Feng was completely determined to end all of this, and we saw a beautiful girl whom they said was the clone of a famous model. Lately, orders for female clones of that model represented 90% of production. That crowd wasn't dumb either. And look at the face of that shameless creep. You already know very well where he was looking, right? Feng stared at his hand. He was holding a pendant with something red in the center, and it seemed very important to him. A bit sad, he said he would take a day off, and his subordinate respectfully said goodbye. But then he started following the captain, asking if he was taking the day off to spend more time with his newlywed wife. Feng ended up punching him in the head and said it was none of his business. The scene shifts to another day, and we see that our guy had indeed just gotten married. His wife was sleeping peacefully in bed and woke up in a cute way. She even wiped the sleep from her eyes. Her husband was on the news, and the reporter said that Captain Feng had discovered an illegal human cloning factory. He gave an interview, and people seemed very confident in Captain Feng's work. While the news was on TV, he was already making breakfast. That guy is a real jack of all trades. His wife's name was Xia, and she hugged him from behind. In a loving way, she commented that he was on TV again, and the guy said he wouldn't rest until the whole cloning scheme collapsed. Xia stood on her tiptoes to smell her husband and said he smelled really good. Actually, she joked that what smelled good was the breakfast he was making. But Feng said they had been married for weeks already, and that she should stop being so cheesy. The girl got upset and said they had just gotten married, so that's why she was being romantic. Then she hugged him tightly and said she would miss him a lot and asked if he would miss her too. That's because she would be traveling to Africa to serve as a doctor for a few days. And the guy was a bit sad about it. At that moment, the news started talking again about the illegal cloning of human beings, which was becoming an increasing trend. The more laboratories were shut down, the more new ones were discovered. It was like a hydra. When you cut off one head, 5 more grow. The girl asked if by any chance she didn't come back, would he make a clone of her to keep him company. Our guy pinched his wife and angrily said she shouldn't talk nonsense because he would never let her disappear. Besides, he wanted to spend all eternity by her side. The girl laughed and called him Piggy, saying she would definitely come back safely. The guy told her to stop calling him Piggy and said she was acting like a child, and while she was hanging onto her husband's back, she was being dragged along. Then we see that they were heading toward the airport. The girl was changing clothes inside the car because she couldn't miss her flight, and she changed with great skill. Then she asked her husband to hand her an outfit. My God, couldn't you have changed at home? You were stalling for nothing. But she said she wasn't stalling. She just wanted to enjoy more time with her husband before leaving on her trip. The light turned red, and he ended up handing one of the clothing pieces to his wife. Jokingly, she asked if he liked her big melons. With a blushing face, he said he did, but only he was allowed to like them. Then she gave her husband a big kiss, and he was surprised since they were doing that in the middle of traffic. The light had already turned green, and the drivers next to them started honking. Sorry everyone, we're going already? He started speeding up so his wife wouldn't miss her flight, and the girl kept laughing lovingly, saying she loved him so much. All that affection from his wife made the guy a bit embarrassed. Minutes later, they arrived at the airport, and he watched her from afar, already missing her deeply. Then she dropped her suitcase and ran to him to give him a goodbye hug. She said she didn't want to be away from her husband, and caressing his wife, he said time would pass very quickly. But she told him to smoke less because if she came back and he had smoked too much, she would stop talking to him. The guy agreed, saying he wouldn't smoke anymore. But as soon as he got into the car, he immediately grabbed a cigarette. He called his boss and asked if there was any case for him to solve. But the woman on the phone said there wasn't any police case for him, and that he should take the day off. However, the guy Feng didn't want to take any day off, especially since his wife was already on the plane, and he would be very anxious. Since he didn't want to stay idle, he asked his boss to send him a mission right away. Seriously, the woman told him to head to Central District 13. Understood, Captain? He turned on his car's siren and drove off at full speed. That's how he arrived at the location his lieutenant had assigned. There were already several onlookers outside commenting about a 23-year-old man who had cloned several famous actresses. They couldn't even imagine the kind of atrocity happening in that apartment next to them. Lately, a very famous actress was being cloned for perverse purposes. You know what I mean? And our hero arrived at the crime scene. "Get out of the way, you lazy people. I'm a police investigator." He approached the building where the young man was being investigated. After arriving at the location, our hero told the other officers that he would go in to investigate. The officer recognized Feng because he was a very famous cop, and the guy even commented that the lieutenant was upstairs and that she was really tough. They could even hear the woman shouting from up there. With a serious face, our hero knew that his lieutenant was indeed very strict. As he went up the floors, there were more onlookers inside the building talking about what was happening. It seemed that after the boy lost his parents, he moved into that apartment and started buying clones to live with him. It looks like you all know a lot about what happened. I'll have to take you to the station to give a statement. At that moment, the onlookers ran away from the investigated boy's door, and who appeared there was our hero's lieutenant. "She's my favorite character in this story, everyone." Holding a knife, she said the boy was late, and looking worried, he asked what she had done. Then he looked behind her and saw what was really happening. The clone was being taken away from the boy, and we saw that there was only one clone, not several like the onlookers had said. They were crying because they didn't want to be separated, and our protagonist realized they truly loved each other, so he asked his lieutenant for a moment. She looked at him with flushed cheeks, and we could already imagine that she might like him, so she agreed, saying he could go there and talk to the prisoner. "Well, officers, leave Captain Feng alone." So everyone left, and our hero stayed alone in the apartment while the girl ran to check if the guy was okay. She asked Ling if he was hurt because of the lieutenant's attack. "That woman is really fierce, everyone." The boy held her face and said that no matter what happened, he would never be separated from her. And then the two hugged each other. It seemed that this clone really loved the boy who had bought her. Determined, she kept saying that no matter what happened, she wouldn't be separated from Ling. She had even offered to be taken away so that he wouldn't be punished. But the guy kept saying he wouldn't let that happen. Very serious, Feng went there and closed the door. Then he lit a cigarette. According to the current laws, both of them would be sent to an isolation city so they could live together as a couple. But since this was the boy's first offense, he would first have to spend a month taking social ethics training. But the guy started crying, saying he hadn't hurt anyone. It didn't make sense for him to be arrested. However, the law had to be followed. It didn't matter whether it was fair or not. Still in tears, the guy kept saying that these problematic laws shouldn't exist, but Feng was very strict and said that the law is the lowest line of defense for society's morality and should always be upheld as something sacred. And since the current laws did not grant rights to clones, she would not be considered a criminal, but she would have to stay in the refuge city. The guy started crying even harder. Since he couldn't live with her there, he began to cry in despair. However, our hero approached him and threw him to the ground. "Someone as weak as you could never protect this girl." And the poor girl in the back started begging him to let go of her boyfriend. With that, our hero got off him and the girl quickly helped him up. Hugging her, he said he would do anything to protect her. Thanks to the information Feng had gathered, he changed his mind and made an exception for Ling. Both of them were surprised. "Hey Ling, are you willing to give up everything for this girl?" The guy said yes. He was willing to give up everything as long as he could stay with her. Then Feng said he would write a report allowing him to enter the refuge city with the girl. The law did not explicitly prohibit citizens from going into the isolation zone. And we saw that our MC still had a good heart and was quite reasonable at times. He left the apartment and his boss asked if everything was ready. With his head down, he said this job could be a bit harsh. Sometimes his boss looked at him with a slightly serious face, and he asked if there was any problem. After turning around, she said there was no problem and told him to follow her. The guy kept following his boss. Then she said that cloning had taken a new form and opened the door to what looked like the man's bathroom. Feng was completely shocked. That was because there were some homemade cloning devices, and the lieutenant explained that they had developed a technology to produce clones at home. No matter how many labs they shut down, new ones kept opening. But now the situation would become even more complicated since they were cloning girls inside their houses. That made Feng extremely angry, but at that moment he received a call on his cell phone, and when he saw the notification he was a bit startled. The lieutenant asked what was happening, and he said it was the airline calling him, scratching his neck. He said his wife had probably forgotten her phone and was asking the airline to let him know. When he answered, he began hearing the words of the woman who worked at the airport, and at that moment his world collapsed. "What? What did you say?" The lieutenant became a bit worried. The man kept shouting, asking what that really meant. The lieutenant, poor thing, didn't understand a thing, and the guy ran desperately toward the airport. Then the lieutenant told the soldiers to take care of the boy and the clone because she had a mission to handle, so she ran after Feng, asking him to wait. But since she was wearing high heels, she twisted her ankle. It hurt a lot, but she left the shoe behind and ran barefoot. That way she managed to catch up to him. Feng told his boss he was taking the day off to deal with something urgent, but of course his boss wouldn't let him face such a critical situation alone, so she got into the car. "Hey Feng, you're acting strange. Did something happen to Shia?" she asked while he shifted gears. He said he would explain on the way, and our hero drove off fast. He almost ran over pedestrians. That's how desperate he was. A little embarrassed, she asked if she should turn on the siren so people would get out of the way. But since it was something personal, he said he couldn't. Then he explained that his wife's flight had disappeared from the radar. Damn it, why did it have to be her flight? The lieutenant's cheeks turned red. Our protagonist even asked why she decided to come with him. She didn't really know how to respond and started stuttering. Then she made up an excuse, saying it was because it seemed like something was wrong. That's why she came along to make sure he didn't act rashly. Of course she was pretending, everyone. She must like him. At least that's what I think. But Feng said she was acting very strangely. It even seemed like the lieutenant already knew this situation was about Xia. Fixing her hair, she said she had imagined this terrible situation was about his wife, since only she could make him lose his composure. At that moment, the lieutenant's phone rang. It was a mission involving the airport because a huge commotion had broken out there. She told her superiors she was already heading to the location, and with a serious look, she said they needed to turn on the siren. Now, this situation was no longer personal, it was work-related. So she grabbed the siren and placed it on top of the car. Step on it. Now they could reach the airport faster. When they finally arrived at the location, a massive storm was happening. The people inside were devastated, worried about their relatives, and even started yelling at the woman responsible for the airline. An elderly lady said that if her son died, she would die too, and a man started getting angry, saying he was going to destroy the whole place. He yelled at the woman to resolve the issue quickly and find the plane his daughter was on. He pointed his finger at the woman who had nothing to do with it and kept shouting that his daughter was a PhD in medicine. They even started threatening the woman, who was completely innocent. Poor thing. At that moment, Feng arrived and saw that the commotion was truly getting out of control. He showed his police badge and told people to step back. A woman came running, saying that her son and husband were on that plane and that they were the foundation of her family. Another man shouted that his daughter was a doctor and couldn't die. Feng was extremely tense with the whole situation and angrily told everyone to back off because they were interfering with the investigation. At that moment, everyone stepped aside and left him face to face with the airline representative. "Are you the one in charge here?" "Yes, officer, I am." Then the man told her to accompany him to a place where they could talk privately. So they went to the conference room. The woman said they had already sent a rescue request to the authorities and had also tried contacting nearby planes and ships. Everyone was doing their best to find the missing plane. Feng was tense because they had done everything possible and still found nothing. Then he asked, "What are the survival rates based on the number of days missing?" Upon hearing that question, the woman grew tense and said there had been cases where people were found even after years. "I want you to give me all the statistics." The survival rate was 78% on the first day, then dropped to 47% in 2 days, 26% in 3 days, and only 1% after a week. At that moment, our hero told her to stop talking. He had already understood everything. After that, he left the room, and outside, people were eager to know the news. They all went toward the officer asking if he had any updates. He said that the authorities were already taking every possible measure to find the plane. A man got angry, shouting, "What kind of news is that?" He wanted to know if his family was safe. They even said the officer was calm only because it wasn't his family on the plane. At that moment, he said that his newlywed wife was also on that plane that had gone missing. That left the old man speechless. Everyone was shocked because there was so much pressure on him, and they even apologized, saying they were sorry. He told everyone to calm down as the authorities would do everything possible to find the plane, and those who had been shouting in anger went silent. Outside, we saw that the lieutenant was following him. The man was so anxious that he couldn't stop smoking. He even remembered his wife telling him not to smoke, but he was devastated. At that moment, his lieutenant sat down and he noticed that her foot was injured. "Hey boss, your foot, did you lose your shoe while chasing me earlier?" She said yes and even remembered that it had happened once before. They had served in the army together, and once, while chasing criminals, she had also lost her shoes. Before she could finish recalling the story, he walked away from her. The woman asked where he was going, and he said he was going to buy some shoes for his friend. She looked surprised, and when she was about to tell him her size, he said he already knew she wore a 37. To lighten the mood, she kicked him playfully, and the guy smiled, though deep down he was very tense because of everything that was happening. Even the lieutenant, who joked with him, was sad deep down. Some time passed, and they went to speak with the airline employee. Several hours had passed, and they hadn't found a single trace of the plane. The intelligence team was searching the entire area, and another day went by. The employee shook her head, saying there was still no news. Throughout all those days, our hero never left the airport, and finally, several days had passed. The survival rate had dropped to only 1%, and all the staff were extremely discouraged. The victims' families wouldn't stop crying, and throughout all that time, the lieutenant never left Feng's side. She even noticed that he was starting to lose his mind, but at the same time, it seemed like she knew something. Feng's phone started ringing. It was a call from an unknown number. She ended up answering it, and the lieutenant started trying to trace who was making that call to him. She even called a security team, asking them to track the number that was talking to her partner. And on the other end of the line was a group called Resurrection for Loved Ones. They were offering a cloning package to our hero. Worried, Feng asked how they knew his information, and they mentioned his wife, who had just passed away, asking if he wouldn't like her to be resurrected. At that moment, he couldn't stop thinking about his wife, but Feng said that according to the official report, his wife wasn't dead, she was only missing. But the man kept saying that her chances of survival were practically zero. That made Feng extremely angry. But the criminals said that police officers are human too, and they also have the right to use clones to resurrect their loved ones. Hearing those words, he looked to the side to see if the lieutenant was hearing the conversation, and the woman stood there watching, her cheeks flushed. Then Feng began to walk away, angrily telling the criminals that a clone could never be a real person. With that, they offered a new service they had just launched, in which the memories of the deceased could be restored through artificial intelligence. All that was needed was a small amount of the person's DNA. And upon hearing that, of course, our protagonist felt tempted, but the criminals said the call was being traced, so they hung up, making Feng start shouting. He truly felt tempted to bring his wife back through cloning. The lieutenant asked what went wrong and why he was so angry. Then he explained everything to her, saying that a group of criminals had called him and that they could even clone his wife's memories. He was a police officer, so he could withstand the pressure, but ordinary people wouldn't be able to. The lieutenant thought that technology was evolving too fast nowadays, and at that moment they heard the sound of several phones ringing. Those were the families of the plane victims, all receiving calls from the same criminals. And after hearing the offers, they all felt tempted. Feng shouted loudly, telling them not to talk to the criminals, but it was too late. After hearing those offers, it would be very hard for them to refuse. The lieutenant said that cloning was illegal, and that cloned humans weren't real. People even looked at the police officers, but soon after they turned their faces away and stepped back. It seemed it wouldn't be easy to convince people not to buy clones, and Feng started thinking that this organization was behind everything. The lieutenant also found it all very suspicious. Seriously, if it were you, wouldn't you also feel tempted to make a clone? Then the lieutenant turned to him and said that Sha would surely be found alive, but Feng knew the chances of that happening were very low. Well, Lieutenant, we say that to the families of the missing just to give them hope, like a placebo effect. The lieutenant apologized, saying she hadn't meant it that way, but he said he wanted to take a week off. He couldn't keep working, and she told him to wait a bit. He was too devastated, and the poor woman couldn't do anything. Later, Feng arrived home completely heartbroken. He placed his hand on the doorknob and immediately remembered his wife welcoming him. That memory hit him hard, but when he opened the door, the house was completely empty and dark. He was deeply sad and sat down on the couch. There he remembered Sha hugging him and saying that their wedding photos turned out beautiful. Then he remembered the day they decided to get married, and again when he looked to the side, he was alone. He lit another cigarette and began to fall apart little by little. He remembered their wedding day when she celebrated joyfully, saying they were now officially husband and wife. She acted like an excited child, running around with happiness, and he also remembered the sweet nickname she used to call him. She shouted that he was her little pig. She had also given him a pendant containing a drop of her blood so that he would always carry it with him. She had a matching pendant saying she had taken a drop of his blood so she could always have it with her. That way they would never be separated. She wanted to always have him by her side, and it was that pendant he had been looking at back in the first chapters. He broke down in tears. However, his phone started ringing again, and when he answered, it was that same unknown number. He demanded to know how those criminals dared to call him again. The criminals said they usually insist with clients who seem like potential buyers, and added that there's nothing wrong with wanting to have loved ones back. They also mentioned that he had shown sympathy for a supposed criminal a few weeks earlier. He immediately got angry, asking how they knew that. And to end the call, they said that if Feng was interested, he just needed to reply to that number. He only had to send a short message. After they hung up, Feng was left deep in thought. He was feeling very tempted to make a clone of his wife, but he had sworn to fight against that. The scene shifted to the next day. His lieutenant decided to go to his house, and when she knocked on the door, she realized he wasn't answering. Angry, she started banging hard on the door. He could hear her calling, but he was so depressed that he didn't even get up from the couch. After much insistence, he finally went there and opened the door, leaving the lieutenant startled. He asked if she had come because his vacation was over, and she said no. The woman took a deep breath and said she had come not as his superior but as his friend. She asked if he was okay, and he said yes. Then she immediately opened the curtains, saying he needed some sunlight. We could see the guy was destroyed. He looked like a dried-up mummy. She placed the bags of drinks on the table and said she had brought some alcohol to cheer him up. He immediately started drinking, spilling it all over his clothes. Then he slammed the bottle on the table. He even commented that he was feeling his body getting really warm. You all know exactly what this woman wanted, right? The guy stood still like a statue, showing no reaction. Then she told him to drink a little more alcohol to see if he would cheer up. He stared at the table, thinking about it. Since he had nothing to lose, he grabbed the bottle and took a sip. And so the two began drinking together. They even toasted. After a while, the lieutenant was completely drunk, and our guy seemed quite resistant to alcohol. They spent the whole afternoon drinking together. A few hours later, Feng's phone started ringing. The lieutenant looked for her phone, and when she grabbed it, she realized it wasn't hers. Oh, then it must be mine ringing. Hello, who's speaking? It was those criminals again, offering the cloning service. The man chuckled and said that his wife wasn't dead, she was only missing. Then he told the lieutenant that everyone kept calling him funeral services, journalists, and that he was sick of it. Half drunk, the woman asked if he knew it was just people bothering him. Why did he still answer? He couldn't risk not picking up the phone. It could be news about Shia. The man started trembling and crying, said he was so afraid of losing service that he had recharged 6 months of phone credit. Yeah, everyone, I admit. At that moment a speck got in my eye, and it looked like a speck got in the lieutenant's eye too. She even went to wipe her face. She seemed a bit upset, as if she knew something. But of course she wouldn't tell our hero, and only said that if Shia came back, she would be sad if he had done something bad to himself. Feng said his friend could relax because he wouldn't hurt himself. Grabbing the bottle, he took another sip. Then he choked because he drank too much and said it was better that way, as it helped him forget a little about what had happened, the accident. The lieutenant looked thoughtful, as if she wanted to tell him something. Then she drank it all and said she was going home. She got into her car and started driving. She was thinking about something related to the accident. The scene shifted to a few months earlier. She was talking to Sha, who said she had already decided to go through with it, and there on the table was that homemade cloning kit. Sha approached the lieutenant and apologized for giving her such a heavy responsibility. Then Sha explained that she would disappear from the world, and because of that she would leave behind a clone to stay by Falm's side. Hearing those words, the lieutenant was shocked. Since the lieutenant knew her well, she said she would listen to the entire plan before judging her. Meanwhile, Sha was crying. She explained that his physical functions were in decline. What? What do you mean? This part might sound confusing, everyone, so pay close attention. Sha said that a cloned person lives only a short time. Using Dolly the sheep as an example, she lived only 6 years, while the average for a sheep is 12. Then Sha said that at that time, she used advanced biotechnology to create a clone that could last longer, but there was a side effect. That side effect was accelerated body degeneration. That means our protagonist is a clone, everyone. At least that's what I understood. Hearing this, the lieutenant asked how much longer Feng had to live. Still crying, Sha said he had around 10 years. It seemed the lieutenant Ting knew that Feng was a clone, and she listened as Sha cried, saying she couldn't bear to be apart from him. So Sha handed her a chip, saying that when the new clone was ready, she should transfer all of her memories into the body of the new clone. It was a new technology she had developed herself, and all her memories were stored inside that chip. A bit startled, the lieutenant asked what would happen to her, but Sha didn't want to say much. It seemed she knew she was in danger. After handing over the chip, she said she was leaving everything in the lieutenant's hands. Then the scene returned to the present, when the lieutenant arrived at a cabin in the middle of the forest. The place was so dark that she needed to use her flashlight to walk. After some time, she finally reached the cabin. Using a key, she opened the door. The place looked abandoned. She dragged a cabinet aside to reveal a door hidden in the floor. After opening the hatch, she found a staircase. The scene was shown in great detail as she descended the steps, no idea why. Then she reached a basement where there were those homemade cloning devices, and inside one was Sha's body, still young. It needed a bit more time to mature into an adult body, and the lieutenant stood there staring at it. She was torn about whether or not to revive the protagonist's wife. She was probably tense the entire time because this could be a perfect opportunity for her to be with him, since to me it seemed she had feelings for Feng. What do you all think? However, she was a good friend and decided to insert the memory chip. She placed it into the computer. The memories and data from the clone were transferred into the body inside the plastic pod. 2 months passed, and the body finally reached adulthood. The computer stated that the host had reached the target age and would soon be activated. The lieutenant stood there with a knife in her hand. She sliced open the plastic. A sticky liquid oozed out everywhere as Ja's body came to life. She sat up, looking dazed. The lieutenant waited, watching closely to see if anything would happen. Meanwhile, Ja remained silent. It seemed her memories were surfacing, and she began to grow restless. Ting tried to help her, but soon Ja felt something bad inside her and vomited that disgusting green liquid. Patting her back, the lieutenant helped her breathe and called her name, trying to see if she remembered it. She was still feeling unwell, but quickly regained consciousness. She took a deep breath. The other woman looked worried, wondering if it had worked. It seemed it had, because Ja turned and called her sister Ting. Finally, it had worked. She even thanked the lieutenant for helping her, and since she was, in quotes, resurrected, it meant her original body had truly died. Without going into too much detail, Ja thanked Ting for everything she had done but said that Feng wasn't in a good state. Of course, that made his wife deeply worried, and she immediately stood up, asking how Feng was doing. She jumped out of that tank, splashing water everywhere, and ran toward the door while Ting shouted for her to come back and get dressed. Besides, she needed to cut her hair so it wouldn't be obvious she was a clone, so they cut it, leaving it just a bit longer. Sister Ting, I'm worried about my husband. Don't you think it would be better to call him first? Ting threw her some clothes she had brought and told her, don't worry, I'll call him myself. Ja got dressed. While fixing her clothes, she asked if Ting had managed to talk to Feng, but it seemed his phone was off, which made her even more anxious. Then Ja grabbed her friend's arm, saying they needed to rush to her husband's house, afraid he might have done something foolish, and they drove off quickly. Her biggest fear was that Feng might have tried to take his own life, but the lieutenant knew her friend would never do that. He loved her too much to be capable of it. She told Ja that he had said he would never end his own life because he always believed she would come back. With a shy smile, Ting admitted she was a little jealous and wished she had a man like that. Meanwhile, Shai's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her reflection and said she felt jealous too. Then, suddenly serious, she urgently asked for Ting's phone. The number she dialed was unavailable. She kept saying, Piggy, answer the phone, and realizing something might truly be wrong, the lieutenant sped up the car. They began coming up with a story to pretend she hadn't died in the accident, that she had been rescued on a deserted island. The lieutenant even recounted how she died, and together they decided to tell a fake story, saying she had been rescued by a tribe in Africa, but the lieutenant revealed that it probably hadn't been an accident at all, it was something planned. She had looked through some official documents and noticed suspicious activity. Moreover, many passengers on that plane had medical backgrounds, which was highly suspicious. Even Shay found it strange. It would be too much of a coincidence. A plane full of doctors crashed, and in a slightly cryptic tone, Shay said she didn't really know what had happened. The only thing she knew was that her other self had made a deal. The lieutenant asked, "What do you mean, a deal?" But Shay didn't say another word. With a sigh, Ting said she would continue the investigation and hope they could discover something. Shay agreed and added that it would be better to change their story, saying that she had been found by an Arab expedition ship, but that she had a head injury and ended up losing her memory. To make sure Feng wouldn't doubt anything or want to investigate, she should say that those Arabs brought her back to China by ship. Somehow they thought that was a good idea, and so they continued their trip. Soon after, they arrived near the apartment where she had lived, and the girl ran off desperately to find her husband. The lights in his room were still on, meaning he had probably just let his phone die. After running up the stairs, they reached the door and began knocking hard. Ting pressed her ear to the door and noticed there was no sound, but then she heard something being dragged inside. That made her panic, and she started pounding on the door even harder. "My God, is Piggy in danger? Don't panic, Shaya. I'm going to break the door down." She stepped back, ready to ram the door, then charged forward. But at that very moment, Feng opened it, and she couldn't stop in time. She fell right on top of him. As expected, it turned into a romantic scene. When she stood up, she was blushing hard. Our hero asked what Ting was doing there. Embarrassed, she stood up, and at that moment he realized his wife was standing right in front of him. She smiled but didn't say anything. "Wait, Shaya, you're alive?" The girl was about to call her husband Piggy, but Ting quickly pinched her, reminding her that she had to pretend she'd lost her memory so he wouldn't suspect she was a clone. So she covered her mouth, and at that moment our hero ran toward her and hugged her tightly. That made her blush. He was holding her so firmly that she could hardly breathe, but then she closed her eyes and hugged him back affectionately. At the end of the hallway there was a noise, and both women turned toward it, completely frozen. What came out of the bathroom was another clone of Shei. Our protagonist had made a clone of his wife, and she was standing there with long hair. She asked Feng who those two women were, and from the look on his face you could tell he knew he was in big trouble. A bit shy, she repeated, "Who are those two women?" Things were getting very interesting. If you've made it this far, leave a like and comment part 2 so YouTube recommends our video to more people. She was acting strangely, asking who those people were. The lieutenant couldn't believe her friend had really cloned his own wife. When Feng looked at his wife, he froze, unsure how she would react. She even took a few steps back, keeping her distance from him. He couldn't say a single word. Then she began to cry. Outside there was noise from the neighbors. The lieutenant realized it was those same nosy neighbors, so she pulled Gia away from the door and slammed it shut. With a sigh, she said they had almost been caught. People outside were gossiping, saying it looked like that police lieutenant who often visited Feng's apartment. They even said they must be dating since they were so close. Embarrassed, Ting shouted for them to stop making things up. Then she turned to Feng and demanded to know what the hell was going on. He didn't know how to respond, and at the end of the hallway stood his beloved clone. The poor woman didn't know how to react to such a situation. You can imagine how heavy the atmosphere was. Pretending she had lost her memory, Gia asked Ting if that man was really her husband. He asked what was wrong with his wife, and the clone looked around the room and noticed a photograph. She realized it was of that same girl and Feng together. Things began to make sense to her, and she realized she was the clone. "I'm a clone. Am I her clone?" At that moment, Ting grabbed Gia's hand and gave the protagonist a scolding look, even though he didn't know what to do. The two women could see that the clone was very nervous, and I'm sure he was thinking, "What have I done?" He slowly walked toward the clone and noticed that, besides being nervous, she was also very embarrassed. But Gia moved faster than he did. He grew worried, trying to figure out what she was going to do to that clone. Then she opened her arms and walked toward the girl. She was trembling, but unexpectedly she reached out and held the girl's hands. The clone Gia looked tense at first, but then tried to understand what was happening. The original Gia told her not to be afraid, saying they should go back to the bathroom to take a bath and put on some clothes. The girl, deeply embarrassed, lowered her head and thanked her. And so the real Gia, in quotes, grabbed her gently and led her away. When they closed the door, Feng was shocked. He hadn't expected that kind of reaction. The atmosphere became awkward. "Hey, Chief Ting, do you know what's happening with Xia?" he asked. The woman sat down on the couch, sighed, and then glared at him with a terrifying look, furious, asking what the hell he had been thinking. Meanwhile, the newly cloned Xia was in the shower. It was hard for her to process everything that was happening. To make things clearer, the Xia with memories will be called Xia 1, and the new one, Xia 2. Xia 1 noticed the girl trembling and quickly realized she had no memories. Our hero had created a clone without any memories at all, so Xia 1 held the girl's hand and told her to calm down. The girl wanted to know what she really was. It was terrifying to appear in the world without understanding anything. That's why she was crying and apologizing. She had already guessed what was going on, that she was a clone of the woman standing in front of her, created only to fulfill her husband's desires. To comfort her, Xia said she had always wanted a younger sister and that her dream had come true. She smiled warmly, her cheeks blushing. Hearing that, Xia too was surprised. Then, "Can I call you sister?" At that moment, she got startled because Xia 1 started acting a little cheeky, joking that she had always wanted to do that to a girl. Look at that expression. Good grief, what a naughty one. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the living room was still tense. The lieutenant had explained the whole story to our hero, and he was only worried that his wife had lost her memory. That seemed to be his only concern. So the lieutenant smacked him hard on the head. Your wife is alive, and the only thing you care about is whether she lost her memory? Then she demanded to know what he had been thinking when he made a clone. He took an envelope and placed it on the table. It was a plane ticket. He had planned to flee to another country and live with his cloned wife. Ting realized he truly loved Xia deeply. She even checked the bathroom to make sure the two women weren't coming out. Then she leaned toward him and whispered, asking if he knew that a clone's feelings for its creator were essentially fake, since they weren't real. Well, Chief, you know me well, I wouldn't do that, he said. When he bought that cloning kit, it had an option. It asked whether he wanted the clone to love its owner unconditionally, but our guy hadn't activated that function, which left Ting quite surprised. And besides that, he hadn't restored the clone's memories. She was basically a new person just with his wife's appearance. She didn't even feel attracted to him because he hadn't activated that feature. At that moment, the door opened, and the two women stepped out. Shane too now had short hair, and the two beautiful women looked like twin sisters. Naturally, both Feng and Ting were stunned. I bet they never imagined the two would get along so well. Even Ting stood up to check if her eyes were deceiving her. They truly looked identical. It was almost impossible to tell them apart. But our hero said no, they were completely different people. He seemed to be able to tell which one was his real wife. Ting asked what made him think that, and he said maybe one understands the heart, and the other knows the heart. Of course, Ting didn't understand a word of that, neither did I, but she admitted it sounded beautiful. The scene shifted to a little later. They were all sitting in the living room, the atmosphere still tense. He didn't know what to say to either of them. What he had done had created an incredibly awkward situation. Ting, visibly irritated, slammed her hand on the table. Everyone turned to look at her. Listen, people, we're not going to solve anything if you all just sit there like idiots. She even demanded that our protagonist give a statement explaining what had happened. He looked at his wife, still thinking she had lost her memory, but she hadn't lost anything at all. Annoyed, Ting stood up and said she was going to the corner store to buy some drinks. After slamming the door behind her, the two of them sat there, mortified, and then the scene lingered for several frames, about 10 shots with neither of them saying a single word. Then our guy reached out, not to shake hands but to slap his own face. He called himself an idiot as he did it. Neither of them expected that reaction. He hit himself so many times that his face was left bruised. Shai ran to stop him, trying to protect her husband. Shai too felt embarrassed because she had acted on instinct. Deep down she already liked him, but she held herself back and let the original Shai go first. The real Shai, being kind as always, grabbed her sister and told her to help by getting some ice for Feng's face. Shai too nodded and ran to the kitchen. After bringing the ice, the two of them started caring for him together. I'm sure you felt a bit jealous at that moment. It seemed like our protagonist's mistake had actually turned out well. The real Shai smiled softly, looking as if she actually liked the situation. Feng asked what she was laughing about. She told him not to move his head or the towel would slip off his face. Then she realized she had just called him by his old nickname. Trying to cover it up, she said she was slowly regaining her memory. She added that she couldn't remember their relationship clearly, but she could feel he was very important to her. Hearing those words, Feng was speechless and turned his face away. Then she called him Piggy again and told him to stop moving. She continued gently pressing the cold cloth on his face, but it was too much for her to process emotionally, and she began to cry. Xia too peeked in and noticed her sister looked sad. The two women sat beside Feng, and the original Xia said that seeing him sitting there like an idiot wasn't how she had imagined her husband to be. She told them that when she was very young she lost her parents in a car accident. Later during college, her last living relative, her grandmother, also passed away. So back then she was completely alone in the world. She had always longed for a boyfriend, someone who could take care of her. She had imagined this man as funny, handsome, and someone who could always make her laugh. She also dreamed of marrying a doctor like herself. Even though Feng didn't fit any of those things, she said she still loved him deeply. Well, she basically called our hero boring and unattractive, but she didn't care whether he was perfect or not. She would keep loving him no matter what, because he was an incredible man. Shedder too listened to all of this, feeling shy and awkward. When Feng was about to say something, Shedder covered his mouth with the cloth. She told him that if she had lost her husband, she wouldn't have been able to bear keeping him alive only in her memories. It was as if she were forgiving him for making a clone. She had only made that clone of herself because she never believed he would be capable of doing it, since it went against everything he stood for. Turning his face toward her, she said he needed to apologize to his little sister, because he was the one who brought her into the world. He turned and faced Shedder too. While the original Shedder told her that if she forgave him, both of them would. The girl stood there with her head down, blushing with embarrassment. Then slowly she looked up and said she had never blamed Feng, because from the very beginning he had never meant for her to replace the real Shai. Shedder too explained that when she first woke up she had been terrified until she heard Feng's voice. It felt like a warm, comforting light. The first thing he said to her was an apology for bringing her into existence without her consent. That voice made her feel safe, and her fear faded. Gradually he told her everything about his life with his wife. He told Shai too how he had met the real Shai, their adventures together, and even funny stories from their dates. Through that she came to know both of them better. She started to find the courage to express how she truly felt, but her words were interrupted by the sound of police sirens. They looked toward the door to see if the police were coming up to the apartment. The lieutenant started banging hard on the door, yelling for them to open it. She was sweating after running up the stairs. Feng quickly shut the door, standing in front of it to block it. He asked what was going on. She said he had been anonymously reported, and the police were coming to investigate whether he had made a clone. What? How do they even know about this? He asked, panicking, while Shai grew worried and the clone began trembling. The lieutenant grew tense and then turned to Feng, calling his name. She said she would take responsibility for suspending him and that she would arrest him herself to make sure he didn't face a harsher punishment. She began to cry and said it would be better for him to flee to the southern country, where relationships with clones were legal. Shai immediately took her sister's hand and began packing their things. The girl was preparing to leave, but our hero placed his hand on the door. He didn't want to let her go. Both women turned to see what he was planning. Meanwhile, Ting shouted that escaping was the best option for him because if he faced the police, he would almost certainly be arrested, but he didn't want Ting to sacrifice her entire career just to help him escape safely. Shai realized her husband truly was a man of great integrity. Ting said she owed him her life since he had saved her multiple times in the field. She ordered the two women to hold him back while she went downstairs to distract the officers. But Feng asked her to be a little selfish, to think about herself, because it wasn't worth throwing her career away. He also told the two women that it would be best for them to take the opportunity to live in the safe city. That was the government's isolation zone, he said. The two women agreed. That way Ting's career wouldn't be put at risk. He walked slowly toward them and embraced both women, explaining that in the safe city they could live peacefully under government protection. Shai hugged her husband tightly and said she would do anything to stay by his side. He then hugged the clone as well, and she blushed awkwardly. Letting go, she shyly asked if she could also stay with them. He said yes. Poor Ting stood there watching the scene, the man she loved surrounded by other women. At that moment, the police began knocking on the door. They felt uncomfortable about having to investigate their own captain. One of them asked whether they should break it down, and the chubby officer quickly objected, saying there was no way they were breaking their chief's door. It was Ting who opened it instead. She told the officers not to use handcuffs, as she would personally escort them to the isolation zone. She was deeply saddened to have to make that decision, and when the officers entered, the chubby one was stunned. After all, Captain Feng had two beautiful women with him, and of course he was jealous. Who wouldn't be? Feng told his team not to call him chief anymore. He had resigned. From now on, he was just an ordinary man who had broken the law. Naturally, the officers looked disappointed. Feng stepped forward, and Xiao tried to stop him. She said they shouldn't leave just yet. They needed to take a bath and gather their things. He smiled faintly and agreed, and the three went to the bedroom to prepare. Xiao too hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should follow, but Xiao told her to come and help pack, so she joined them. First, our guy shaved, then took a long bath. He was quite a mess. The clone stood nearby, flustered and shy. When he was done, he looked sharp again, and both women looked stunning. They all seemed happy, ready to start a peaceful new life in the refuge city. They were escorted in a police car. The lieutenant rode with them, and honestly, she's still my favorite character. Feng talked quietly with his former superior, saying that this anonymous report didn't seem simple. The clones asked what he meant by that. He explained that he had been extremely careful so no detective could find out he had created a clone, so they concluded that the tip must have come from those underground cloning dealers. The women wondered why they would do such a thing. But after thinking it over, Ting agreed with Feng. It actually made perfect sense. The first motive that came to mind was to destroy his reputation. Since he was a symbol of law and order, exposing him would shift public opinion. It would serve as positive publicity for the criminal cloning network. But Feng told Ting she needed to act fast. She should show the media that even police officers could make mistakes and face justice. Ting disagreed, worried about him, but he told her to stay calm. Everyone had to face the consequences of their choices. He had made his. Looking at his wife, he felt sad. He hadn't expected things to end this way. Then he looked at the clone. He believed it was better to be arrested and face trial publicly. Ting just watched him silently, taking in his resolve. His wife held his hand and said she was proud to have married such a man. Her face was soft, full of love and admiration. Shao too also watched and felt the urge to touch his hand, but she held back, knowing the other Shao might get jealous. She lowered her arms, but she also felt sad. After gathering some courage, she asked if she could stay by his side forever as well. Our hero looked at his wife for confirmation. I told you this main character is one lucky man. He hesitated for a moment. Then Shaw grabbed her husband's hand, made him hold the clone's hand too, and playfully called her sister silly, saying of course they could all stay together. She looked at Feng with a motivated expression and said everything would be fine. What our hero wanted was to face trial, serve his sentence, and then spend the rest of his life with them. But Ting knew things might not turn out that way. He could end up facing a long imprisonment. Night had fallen, and the women slept beside him. When morning came, they finally arrived at the quarantine zone. The soldiers knocked on the door, telling them to wake up, while the girls rubbed the sleep from their eyes. Ting said she had a bad feeling about it, and Feng replied that he didn't think things would be as simple as they imagined. With a serious look, Ting asked if he had any clues, but shaking his head, he said no, not yet, but there was something he wanted to ask of her. All right, Feng, tell me, she said. He made his request, but we don't know what it was. Then the soldiers ordered the group to step out of the truck, and everyone was escorted into the quarantine area. But the clone Xie felt something strange in her chest. Before they parted ways, Ting said she would remember his request, and Feng confirmed it. Once the transfer was complete, she wouldn't have to worry about the case anymore. The farewell was very hard for Ting because she had feelings for him. She told him that even with this wall between them, he wouldn't truly be confined. He understood what she meant. He wouldn't be unhappy just because he was away from society. For him, the only thing that mattered was spending the rest of his life with the two women. Honestly, Ting's expression broke my heart. She walked toward the clones and told them to hold on to hope, that one day the laws might change, granting clones the same rights as normal humans. Public opinion was shifting rapidly, and many people already supported giving clones equal rights. Reaching out her hand, she added that even government officials were beginning to consider it. At that moment, Shia walked over and hugged her friend. She whispered in Ting's ear, thanking her deeply for everything she had done. Our hero stood nearby but couldn't hear what was said. It seemed Shia spoke a few more words, though we couldn't make them out. The clone Jia stood quietly behind them observing. Then the door opened for them to enter. Poor Ting stood back, watching from a distance as the man she loved walked away. "So you're really going to leave me behind and live a peaceful life, you bastard," she muttered. Yes, she actually said that. Inside, we saw a rude guard mistreating the two women just because they were clones. Naturally, that made Feng furious. On top of that, the creep was clearly attracted to them, eyeing their bodies with a disgusting grin. With a shameless smirk, he began flirting with them, making the girls uncomfortable. Feng stepped in front of them and asked what the old man's problem was. The guard immediately realized he was in deep trouble. This was not a man to mess with. "You insolent worm, what were you looking at?" Feng growled. "Oh, so a criminal dares to glare at me." The guard shot back, but our hero didn't flinch. His expression turned deadly serious, and the guard began trembling, even taking a step back. Feng ordered him to do his job properly. The man nodded, terrified, his tail between his legs. Then they were taken to a room where their photos were taken for identification cards. Each of them received a separate code. The clerk handed the cards over politely this time. Next, they were taken to a room to watch an instructional video explaining how the safe zone worked. In the video, a woman explained that the yellow zone was the residential area. The red zone was the work sector, where they could take on jobs to earn points. Within the residential areas were supply shops where points could be exchanged for food. Smiling, the woman in the video said they could live and work freely within the safe city. They looked at each other and smiled, finding the idea quite appealing. When the video ended, a security camera showed an old man watching everything. He seemed very interested in the two women. Apparently, the old man had good taste. Smiling slyly, he told his subordinates to bring those two women to him. That sleazy guard obeyed his superior immediately. He went to the room and told the three that they needed to undergo medical examinations. In the hallway, he explained that the men's exams were done separately, pointing to the corridor where the women should go. Then he told Feng to follow him. The three said their goodbyes, and poor Feng suspected nothing, nor did the two women. Shia held Shai Tu's hand as they walked toward the indicated room. The disgusting old man watched them go, already knowing what was about to happen, his face twisted in a vile grin. They entered a room where a camera scanned their faces. Immediately, the door opened. Inside, they saw two guards and started to realize this wasn't where medical exams were supposed to take place. Shia glanced around and noticed a sign that read, "Office Hall of the Clone Isolation Zone." Realizing they had been tricked, she ran toward the door, slamming into it with all her strength in an attempt to break it down. It didn't work. Her shoulder throbbed in pain. Poor girl. Shia too reached out, calling for help, but one of the soldiers grabbed her, while another restrained Shia. She quickly realized these men intended to harm them. Using brute force, they dragged the two women away. They screamed for help, but it was useless. One of the guards laughed and said there was no point shouting, no one would come to save them. He added that clones in the safe zone didn't have the right to survive anyway. Then he smirked, saying they should feel lucky, the boss had chosen them personally. The fool kept that sick grin on his face. Shia began crying in desperation, but there was nothing they could do as they were taken to the director's room. Inside the elevator, Shia tried to comfort her clone. The girl asked if Feng wouldn't come to save them. "Don't panic," Shia said. "They don't know Feng's abilities. He'll definitely come for us. We just have to buy time." "But sister," the clone asked, "I thought you lost your memory." At that moment, Shia revealed that she hadn't lost her memory at all. It had all been part of her plan. Meanwhile, Feng arrived at the medical checkup area and immediately sensed something was off. Suspicious, he asked, "Why is that guy leaving?" The attendant told Feng it wasn't his business. Feng grabbed the man's shoulder, but the old creep pulled out an electric baton to attack him. As expected, that didn't end well for the guard. Another soldier came at him too, but Feng quickly took him down. Furious, Feng said he'd be the one asking questions now and demanded to know where the two women had been taken. Terrified, the man stammered that he couldn't say. Feng tightened his grip on his neck until the man screamed in pain. Finally, he confessed that his boss had taken interest in the women and summoned them for entertainment. Could the director of this place be some kind of tyrant? Feng ordered him to lead the way, but the man said it was impossible. There was a rebellion happening in the safe city, and several doors leading to the director's chamber were sealed. At that moment, Feng realized the safe city was no paradise after all. Since the coward was no longer useful, Feng kicked him across the room. The man got up, begging for mercy, and led Feng to another section. The next door was made of steel, impossible to break. The creep smirked and said the director had probably already met the women. It was too late now. Feng went to a nearby control station and spotted a security terminal. He used it to place a call. A voice asked who was requesting access. Feng still had a valid government ID that wouldn't expire for 3 more days. He said, "This is Officer Yu Feng. I'm conducting an inspection of this department." The man checked the computer, saw Feng's credentials, and confirmed that he was indeed a police captain. He granted access and even saluted, welcoming him. The other worker in the back looked terrified, shaking as the steel door unlocked. It was the perfect chance for the cowardly guard to escape. He ran off shouting for the alarms to be triggered, claiming a deported criminal was causing trouble. Realizing what happened, Feng chased him down, grabbing him by the throat. "So you're like a dog that can't stop eating its own filth," he growled. Panicking, the man begged for forgiveness, saying he regretted everything, but it was too late. Feng beat him mercilessly, finishing with a decisive blow. The man collapsed on the floor, trembling and wetting himself in fear. On the security monitors, the staff witnessed everything and immediately sounded the alarms. The entire northern sector of the safe city went on high alert. An operator shouted that an intruder was causing trouble in the north sector, but Feng had already reached the control room. Grabbing another worker by the collar, he demanded to know where the director's office was. The man stammered that he didn't know. The director constantly changed locations and never stayed in one place. Over the radio, someone asked if the alert was real. Feng grabbed the device and said, "The suspect is heading toward the director's office. Send reinforcements immediately." Feng left the security room wearing a guard's uniform. You can already imagine what happened to the poor man who used to wear it. With the stolen ID card, he gained access to several restricted areas and noticed a group of soldiers approaching. They were heading toward the director's office to intercept the supposed intruder. All of them were heavily armed. Raising his hands, Feng shouted that the criminal was on his way to attack the chief. The soldiers immediately ran off, revealing the path that led straight to the director's office. Taking advantage of the distraction, Feng chose another route and ran up the stairs, trying to reach the office first. Several guards were stationed in front of the door, and when he appeared, they demanded to know who he was. From a distance, Feng shouted that he was on their side and had come to check if the director was safe. The soldiers seemed unsure, but since Feng looked confident and authoritative, they relaxed slightly. One of them said the boss was busy with 2 girls. Trying to hide his fury, Feng joked that the director must be very composed, even in times of crisis. A guard in the back laughed, saying the boss was indeed lucky, though he added that Feng's face looked unfamiliar and asked what department he was from. Then from inside the office, Feng heard his wife's voice screaming at the disgusting old man to get off her. He couldn't waste another second. Feng rushed forward and punched both guards so hard that they collapsed, writhing in pain on the floor. Yes, our hero was unbelievably strong. He tried the handle, but the door was locked, so he kicked it open, breaking it down completely. The director turned furious and shouted, demanding to know which fool had interrupted him. The scene inside was revolting, but I'll spare you the details. Xia's face was bruised, yet when she saw Feng, she smiled faintly and said, "The little pig came." The disgusting man sneered and asked if the new employee wanted to die for interrupting him. Coldly, Feng approached the fat man. Staring with hatred, he listened as the old pervert ranted about teaching him some manners. "Listen here, old man," Feng said. "Was it you who hurt Xia's face?" The greasy director raised his hand to strike him, but Feng's slap landed first, and he didn't stop there. He hit him again and again. The man fell to the floor yelling, "How dare you!" Feng responded with another flurry of blows. The beating was so brutal that the man's face became unrecognizable. Eventually he dropped to his knees. "Please, young man, stop. You'll kill me," he begged. The 2 women started laughing, finding the situation oddly satisfying. Shaz too looked at Feng with wide, sparkling eyes, utterly mesmerized. To her he looked like a true hero. Then the soldiers burst in, pointing their rifles at them. Shaz too froze in terror as they aimed directly at the group. The fat man ducked behind a desk, yelling at his soldiers to shoot. Gunfire erupted instantly. The soldiers scanned the room, trying to spot Feng, but before they could react, he was already in front of them. He kicked one man's shin so hard it snapped like a twig. Then he seized the fallen soldier's weapon. Using the body as a shield, he fired back, eliminating the remaining guards within seconds. Finally, he shot the last one under the chin. In just moments, Feng had taken them all down. He glared at the trembling fat man, his expression pure fury. The coward began to shake uncontrollably, and I'm sure he soiled himself. Hidden under his desk was a pistol, which he grabbed, aiming it at the women. He shouted that he'd kill them both. But really, did he think Feng would let that happen? Feng flicked his wrist, twisting the man's finger backward with a crack that made him scream like a child. Pointing the gun at him, Feng ordered him to explain what was going on in that facility. Before he could answer, Xia stormed over and started stomping on the man's head. And between us, that kind of high-heel stomp must hurt. She screamed at him, calling him disgusting. "Come on, Sister Xia too. Step on him with me." The clone hesitated, blushing, and asked where she should step. "Where it hurts most," Xia replied. You can probably guess where she meant. The clone stomped down hard, and the man howled in agony. They didn't stop after 1 or 2 kicks. No, they kept going until they were out of breath. The man's face was even uglier than before, almost unrecognizable. Kneeling, he begged for mercy, pleading for his life. Then he offered them a deal, saying he could help them escape the safe city. Without his help, he claimed, there was no way out. Xia immediately grew angry, demanding to know who told the man he could stand up. That woman had quite a temper. Then she told Feng that one of the soldiers had said it was impossible for clones to leave the safe city alive. Feng ordered the fat man to explain exactly what was happening. The man said a violent conflict had broken out within the safe city. Everyone was shocked after all. They had believed the safe city was actually safe. and before he could say more, Xia kicked him again, shouting that everything was his fault. He tried to apologize, insisting they should listen to his explanation, but it didn't help. She kicked him in the mouth, and then came a flurry of blows. Jair too even took the opportunity to land a hit in the most painful spot imaginable. You can guess where. These two girls were absolutely furious. After 10 minutes of beating, he begged them to stop. Feng approached and told him to speak clearly, so the man explained that the safe city was located in the middle of the desert. But 2 weeks earlier, a disaster had blocked the only supply route, and the transport trucks couldn't reach the city. Because of that, people inside had begun to fight over resources. Jair grew angry, asking why the disgusting man hadn't called for rescue. Kneeling, he said he had tried, but no one responded. Some politicians believed clones didn't deserve equal rights, and many citizens thought public funds shouldn't be spent on them. That revelation shocked everyone. Jair trembled with rage. How can they say that? Clones also have blood and beating hearts. Feng asked why they hadn't tried to suppress the rebellion in the isolation zone. The man explained they only had 8,000 staff members against more than 3 million people living inside the safe city. They realized it was impossible to control such a massive uprising. Bruised and terrified, the man said he could help the 3 of them escape without being noticed. Feng turned to his wife and asked if she wanted to leave. With a sad expression, she said that as a doctor she couldn't abandon people in need. Feng smiled faintly and remarked that amnesia or not, she still always thought of others first. Confident, Jai nodded. Then he turned to the clone and told her it would be dangerous to stay with them. The girl was frightened but gathered her courage, saying she would stay to help too. Feng warned her again that it would be dangerous, but she said the people suffering inside were clones like her and she wanted to help them. Even if she wasn't skilled, she could still save someone. She promised to do her best and swore she wouldn't be a burden. Feng looked at his wife and both of them agreed. Then he turned back to the fat man and ordered him to prepare a vehicle to take them to the battlefield. "Move it," he shouted. "Get a vehicle ready to take us to the conflict zone." The man hesitated. "What do you plan to do there?" "That's none of your business, you filthy pig," Feng snapped. "Stop wasting time and get the vehicle." And of course, Xiaosh kicked him again for good measure. They finally got the vehicle they needed and headed toward the heart of the conflict. Up on the fortress wall, a group of men discussed investigating Feng's identity. They were certain he wasn't just an ordinary man. He must be from a special forces unit. One of them, a long-haired man, warned that if Feng managed to stop the uprising, their entire plan would collapse. But the old leader dismissed the concern, saying 3 people would never be enough to end the chaos they had started. Indeed, the war had been deliberately caused by them. Then the old man winced in pain, apparently somewhere very sensitive, and shouted that he needed to get to the infirmary immediately. He and his men rushed to the elevator. Meanwhile, Feng was in the vehicle heading toward the safe city. The streets were eerily empty, which he found unsettling. In truth, one of the facility workers was driving. Feng sat in the front passenger seat. The driver explained that the work zone they were passing through was deserted because no one wanted to work. There was no food left to buy. Soon they reached the residential area where the fighting was taking place. As they stepped out of the car, the sounds of explosions echoed in the distance. Feng grew serious, and Xiao too clung to his arm, admitting she was scared. He told her not to worry and to stay behind him. The driver used his card to unlock the entrance and wished them good luck. When they entered, they immediately realized the atmosphere inside was completely different. The place was in complete ruins. What was happening there looked like a full-blown war between rival factions. A group of people tried to climb the gates while female clones, many modeled after famous celebrities, hurled stones and fired slingshots to drive them back. That was enough to make the attackers fall to the other side. They too seemed to be clones, modeled after a well-known actor. One of them threw a Molotov cocktail that exploded as it crossed over the barrier. A clone was hit directly, catching fire and turning into ashes. Shia witnessed everything, and as expected, the sight was deeply traumatic. She tried to understand why such chaos was happening, but the situation was far worse than they had imagined. Dozens were injured and some screamed in agony. Fernan looked around in shock and said something was very wrong. This wasn't just a riot, it was a battle between 2 organized forces. In other words, the disgusting fat chief had lied to them. Shia tore a strip of her clothing and tied up her hair. She told her sister not to stand there doing nothing, and to help her treat the wounded. The clone wasn't sure what to do, but she agreed. And yes, her torn clothes somehow looked magically repaired now. Shia teased her husband, reminding him that he had promised to stop the conflict just minutes earlier. He nodded confidently, saying he still would. "Then show me just how amazing the man I married really is," she said. Shia ran ahead, while the clone told Feng to be careful as they both hurried to aid the injured. Feng, on the other hand, headed straight toward the most violent part of the battlefield. Several clones were already using medical equipment, but the number of wounded was overwhelming. A girl screamed that her boyfriend wouldn't stop bleeding, and another dragged herself forward, her body covered in burns. There were simply too many injured to handle. One nurse began to panic, unsure what to do. Shia too asked how they could possibly help when there were so many people suffering. "Don't panic on a battlefield," Shia said firmly. "What we need most is calm." She told everyone to stay composed. The calmer they were, the better their chances of saving lives. Then she shouted for everyone to remain calm and stop panicking. She ordered them to prioritize those closest by and those who were critically wounded. Turning to her sister, she pointed and said, "Help organize the new arrivals. Divide them into 3 groups. The lightly injured, the seriously wounded, and the ones in critical condition." The clone nodded and ran off to help. Meanwhile, Feng searched for a leader to speak with. He saw a group of people climbing a fence in the distance. Then someone called out, "Officer Feng, what are you doing here?" When Feng turned, he recognized the man. It was someone he had helped months earlier. The man introduced himself as Li Yong and asked if Feng remembered him. Feng said he did and asked what had caused such a massive war. Excited, Li Yong said Feng's arrival was perfect and that he'd take him to the command center. On the way, Li Yong explained that 3 factions were fighting, though he didn't know exactly why. When he arrived, the conflict was already in full swing. He only knew that one faction was being directed by a powerful figure who seemed to be orchestrating everything. They had formed a supervision squad and already broken through the first defensive line. This was the second. Feng asked what the third faction was doing. Li Yong replied that they hadn't moved yet, they were waiting. From the description, Feng concluded that the person behind it all had serious military training. Then Li Yong added that the second in command was someone Feng personally knew. "What? Someone I know?" Feng asked, stunned. And that's where the first part of this story ends. If you've made it this far, comment "cloned waifu." That way I'll know you're a true fan of the series, and make sure to watch until the end. The more comments you leave, the higher the chance I'll bring part 2, since YouTube will recommend this video to more people. There are still around 15 chapters left for me to cover. This story's getting really interesting, I can't wait to see where it goes next. I'll leave 2 more videos here on the channel that I'm sure you'll enjoy. See you there. That's it for now, thanks for watching everyone.